Hello, everyone, and good morning, and welcome to this month's National Weather Association's Webinar Wednesday. My name is Tim Bryce. I'm a member of the Social Media Committee for the National Weather Association. I'm also a forecaster with the National Weather Service in El Paso. Today, we're going to be talking about should weather messaging wear uniforms? Really, we're talking about here color consistency use in the weather enterprise. And I'm joined by a great panel today. We're going to be talking about things like, should all tornado watches be the color red when we see them graphically? Or maybe, is it confusing to the public when they see one TV station have a flash flood watch in yellow, another TV station in the same market has the flash flood watch in green, and another station has it in orange? Does that confuse the public? We're going to cover all kinds of subjects like that today. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Like I said, we've got a great panel put together. Our moderator for today is Dr. Gina Esco. She's a senior social scientist at the Eastern Research Group. How are you doing, Dr. Gina?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Also as a panelist today is Rick Smith. He is a weather coordination meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Norman, Oklahoma. How are you, Rick?
Hey, Tim, I'm doing great, and it's an honor to be here with you all.
I'm looking forward to the conversation. Next down the line here is Kent Carr. He is a graphic designer and it says here in my notes, part-time professor of graphic design.
Yes, amongst other things.
Very good. Well, I'm glad you could join us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Also joining us on the call and the hangout is Irene Sands. She is a digital meteorologist at WFTV in Orlando, Florida. How are you doing there in the great Sunshine State? Oh, she's still muted. Let's unmute her real quick. Okay.
Oh, there we go. Now I'm doing better now. Thank you.
You sound better.
Must be. There we go. Good. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. And finally, Mark Fox, who is a warning coordination meteorologist in the great city of Fort Worth at the WFO there in Fort Worth and Dallas. How are you, sir?
Doing well, Tim. Thanks for having us. Glad to be here.
Very good. Well, I'm really looking forward to the discussion today and all the things we're going to talk about. But let us move on to, I'm going to turn things over to Miss Dr. Gina now, and she's going to kind of lead the panelists through our discussion. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, thank you all for joining us out there in the virtual world. Please feel free to tweet us. We've got folks monitoring, and we'll be able to incorporate your questions as well as we can within an hour. There's so much to cover.
Hey, Dr. Gina, before I forgot to mention, I'm glad you mentioned that. Just so everyone knows, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but we are going to be monitoring the hashtag NWA WebWed. So that's NWAWEBWED, and that's the hashtag we'll be looking for on Twitter. So if you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to hop in there and throw that tweet out there. I apologize for interrupting. I had it on my notes here to mention that, so lead away.
No, that's okay. See, this is how we tag team. This is so good. It's like we planned it. Awesome. So what I'd love to do is, if we're going to talk about consistency in weather and whether weather should wear uniforms, I thought let's take us out of the weather community for just a moment and think about an analogy somewhere else. So when we go to weather conferences, be it NWA, AMS, or any other one, like an emergency management one, and a bunch of weather service folks are there, sometimes you all wear shirts that might have a logo on it. Is it the same shirt? It's the same logo. But is it a different shirt? So are you really wearing a uniform? Do you look consistent? What does consistency mean? And I often think about this when I go shopping. When I go to a mall and I want to look for a shirt, I'm not looking for the same shirt. If every store sold the same shirt, a mall would be very boring. Indeed, I'm looking for diversity of shirts. I'm looking for ones with long sleeves, short sleeves, three-quarter sleeves, sleeveless. Whoa, the possibilities. They're all still shirts, but they're different. So begs the question, what is the difference between a uniform and having a consistent thing? And in this case, a consistent weather message, be it graphical or verbal. And so what I thought I would do, and then I'm going to throw it to our esteemed panelists, is I'm going to read the dictionary definition of consistency. This is from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary online. Feel free to do this at home if you'd like to see it. There are three main definitions. The first is archaic. A condition of adhering together, a firmness of material substance. Well, I'm not exactly sure that that's what we're shooting for weather consistency. So let's go to the next one. Degree of firmness, density, now I can't even say that. Viscosity? Sorry, I'm looking at things and throwing my brain off. Resistance to movement or separation of constituent particles. Again, not so sure that's what we're looking for. Okay, but the third part of the definition is where I think we might have some relevance. And I really like the terms here, and I'm really curious how the panelists are going to respond to them. The third definition is the following: agreement or harmony of parts or features to one another or a whole. And if we think of the whole as the weather enterprise, that of not just the National Weather Service, but our great partners in broadcast meteorology and weather industry, our partners in academia, we have a really growing blogging community. If we think of agreement or harmony as consistency, is that what we're looking for? And gosh, what does that look like? So folks, I know you've done some work on what you think consistency is. Who would like to jump in? We've got some nodding. Rick's laughing already. Kent is like, I don't know what to do with this. All right, so which of the laughing individuals, Kent or Rick, would like to go first?
I can jump in.
Okay, Rick, great.
I'm afraid today I'm on the panel, and I feel like I'm going to be a panelist that just asks more questions than has any answers. But I think with this topic, that's how it is.
Yeah.
It's such a complex subject, and I loved your analogies about shopping. I love the analogy about the Weather Service logo on different colored shirts. But how does that apply to weather information? And I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. Hopefully our other esteemed panelists have all the answers for us. Mark looks like he has answers, but it's very complicated. And I don't think it's not nearly as simple as some people think it is. It's not nearly as simple as some people want to wave a magic wand and say, everybody say the same thing, and then all of our problems will be solved. It's very, very, I just keep saying it over and over. It's very, very complex. And I don't think there's easy answers to this issue.
Agreed. I think it is indeed very complex. And Kent, Dr. Kent Kerr, I'm going to call you Kent for now just to be more informal.
Not a doctor, just for full disclosure there.
What do you think? You're coming from a graphical design perspective, not necessarily from sort of an operational perspective like our other three panelists. What do you think about whether it's simple or not to achieve this thing we call consistency?
For me, consistency is all about form and color, and I think the definition that you provided is very accurate and analogous to graphic design, harmony and parts of the whole in particular. We have an interdisciplinary theory called Gestalt, which tells us that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Right.
So, like you had said, the difficulty comes in getting all of those parts to sort of work together to form something cohesive.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the challenges in risk communication. We often talk about uncertainty and numeracy, and there's another theory out there called fuzzy trace theory, which says that people often don't focus on the individual numbers in a sentence, but instead they take away the gist of a message. Yeah, exactly. And so what are we trying to achieve, and from whose perspective, I think, is one of the really great questions. From the operational perspective, all of you are really in the details. You're creating that message or creating that graphic design. And as a weather enterprise, if we look at the whole, we look at all the individual pieces because you're actually analyzing each of the attributes of the messages and of the weather. But when we look at Kent's background and my background from a sort of public perception, maybe they're taking in the gist of the message. And so I guess it begs the question, what part of this needs to be consistent? I'm still not sure we know what consistency is, but what part of it needs to be consistent? Is it the public view that the gist of the message is sort of same or sameness or harmonious enough? Or is it the details of the message? So perhaps let's go a little bit more towards that operational focus. I know Mark and Rick are kind of like nodding, and I see Irene getting a little, what are your thoughts sort of on the operational side of where you look for consistency?
Well, I'll jump in here, but what you just said, Dr. Gina, was exactly what kind of resonated with me because operationally it is very easy to really start to get into the weeds, so to speak, and then sometimes the gist gets taken out of context from what it may originally be intended. But a lot of the times with me, consistency, I actually like that first definition that you talked about, being adhering together. It may be a little archaic, but the gist of what's going out there does need to be somewhat similar. I know Rick and Norman are right next door. There are times we may not fully agree on exactly what's going to happen, but the gist is, thunderstorms or not, or today fire weather or not, and trying to make sure that everybody is kind of on the same page. So that adhering together really comes back to that the gist that a lot of people are taking away, while some of us forecasters are really diving down to the piece of bark on that one tree in the forest and really think that's the really important part. And, as long as we can kind of get the gist out there and try to figure out that we are looking at a forest and an individual tree, try to figure everything out from there.
I mean,
but I'm with Rick there. I'm going to have a lot more questions than answers.
And that's okay. If anything, as long as we spark interest in the field and we've made people think about this topic, I think that's great. Isn't it interesting that this definition has the word archaic in harmony in the same definition, right?
It doesn't happen anymore.
I mean, maybe to achieve consistency, maybe people think it's going to be some melodic line, but maybe actually consistency is a little archaic. It's a little complicated to achieve consistency. And sometimes the details, I think, Mark, you said a little bit that sometimes the details can sort of fog the gist. So, Irene, you haven't had a turn to sort of speak up. And I know, have you seen examples of perhaps where the details of messages maybe have overshadowed the message?
Yes, I think at least in the broadcasting field, we have us, then we have management, then we have maybe even consultants. We have a lot of people that come into this wheel of work. So all stations are different, all cultures are different. Sometimes we've even I've worked in Spanish language TV, I've worked in English in TV, and it's hard. It's hard to get the whole wheel to work and the whole wheel to even understand the importance of consistency. And I think going back to Mark's adhering together, I mean, the main goal that I always try to state to whomever I'm working with, just we're here for the common purpose, purpose, to keep people informed, regardless if you like it pink or if I like the watch box or the warning box a certain color, blue, green, whatever. I mean, we have to keep the consistency, because at the end of the day, not everybody's going to be sitting down flipping through the channels. There's a high probably chance that they're going to watch their favorite meteorologist or the most trustworthy or whatever. But at the end, the common goal should be keeping people informed. And if this means being consistent with the graphics, then let it be it.
Yeah, so let's explore a little bit, what would it look like? So, all right, so we have two parts of this Merriam-Webster dictionary that we kind of like. We like the archaic part.
Sorry.
It's okay. We like the adhering together. This idea of agreement or harmony, and that to me is agreement to me is, ooh, I don't know. To me, agreement almost feels a little bit more like a uniform again, like we all need to be wearing the same color, right? Or the message needs to look exactly the same. But harmony to me seems a little different than agreement. So, all right, so we admit that sometimes the details of our messages can overshadow the gist. We also kind of agree that the gist of the message is what we want to get out there, to get our message out, because this is really about protecting lives, right? This is really about safety. So we want that gist out there. But if there are times where we are so different, so if we think about consistency to uniforms as a spectrum, right? You can either be completely uniform or you can be completely not uniform. And consistency might be somewhere in the middle, right? So I think there's a goal here that maybe we don't think we all need to look entirely the same. Irene, as you said, you have other pressures on you, marketing, PR. You do want to look a little different than the station that you're competing with, right? And a little friendly competition goes a long way, right? So you do want to look a little different. Well, we have to acknowledge that, right? PR and marketing are part of communication. That's part of getting people's attention. If people aren't paying attention to the message, then they're certainly not going to hear the gist of it, right? So we need to be different enough that we acknowledge the marketing aspects of communication, but maybe similar enough to make sure that gist gets out. How do we do it? So maybe what we could look at together as a panel is, can you give me some examples where we were so different that the message was lost?
Gina, I've got a whole file, an electronic file I keep. Since we started doing the new outlooks, the 5-level outlooks. I just keep comments that we get on our Facebook page, especially. There's a lot of confusion out there and about the new outlooks, but then there's a lot of confusion because between us and the 4 different TV stations, or the 4 main TV stations here in the Oklahoma City area, people are getting 5 different versions of the outlook. And so I think it's so important for us to, I think we really need to be looking, and I think everybody on the panel knows this, we need to be looking at what do the people that we're serving think? What do they care? Does it even matter if there's 5 different outlooks? But I picked out some comments, today. Pick one source and stick with it. I don't know who to believe. Who do we believe when literally everyone is saying something different? Why are there so many different opinions? As of right now, I don't believe any of them. So certainly there's lots of examples, and this is one city, but there's lots of examples nationwide. I'm sure that kind of thing goes on. What one of my main questions is, does it matter? I mean, there's a few people that comment on Facebook that say, I'm so confused, and the perception always has been, and what we've been told when learning about social science research applying to warnings, is how important consistency is, and how much people do verification, and they go and look at multiple sources, and then what happens to them when they get varying messages from multiple sources. So I've got plenty of examples of cases where the message was, and it's not even that it's not like we're on opposite ends of the spectrum. The gist is there, the general information is there in all of these situations that people are commenting on. It's just the details. And again, I love Mark's comment. I love how that came out, that really what we're trying to get people to think of is the gist and not really those details. So it's come down to me on social media telling people, well, it feels weird, but I'm telling them, well, ignore the colors. Don't worry about what color you're in. Don't worry about what number, what word. If there's any color on a map, on any map that you look at that has your house in it, pay attention to the weather. I don't know what else to tell people about that, but I'm rambling, but there's plenty of examples.
No,
this is great. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you're not rambling, Rick, because I can verify exactly what he just said as well from our experience. The colors seem to be the first thing that people notice, and if we or some middle school blogger has got a color that's different or a word that's different, it comes back to well, who do I trust? Your opinions are different, and really the opinions are not different, but the color or the word or some other combination of the two can come through. So in this case, sometimes those little details kind of get in the way of saying, okay, hey, today is a day that you've got to watch out for either severe thunderstorms or fire weather or whatever the case may be. And we're trying to tell people, like Rick just said, you've got to pay attention to the weather a little closer today. Don't worry about the number. Don't worry about the colors. Don't worry about that. But sometimes they can get in the way, at least in my experience, in my opinion.
And Irene, how about you from sort of the broadcast meteorology perspective? How do you feel when perhaps you're trying to get at a certain message and you feel your friendly competitors from other stations, do you ever feel that they're countering your message in a non-productive way? Not intentional, of course. Oh, Irene seems to be muted.
We don't seem to hear her. Let's see.
Technical difficulties.
Of course. She's not muted on my end. So
all right.
Go ahead and move on, and I'll work with Irene on that.
No problem. Okay, we'll figure out those technical difficulties. Kent, I'm curious. what some of your reactions are to some of this. When Rick, when you said sort of ignore the colors that you thought were sort of different in terms of many different sources communicating outlooks, for example,
Yes.
I immediately, what came to mind was sort of central versus peripheral processing of messages in marketing and PR. And sometimes colors can be used as a peripheral cue. It's not really the main part of the message, but it can sort of enhance that.
Mhm.
But sometimes colors can be really important to a message. And so I was wondering, Kent, from your graphical design background, what do you say that should people ignore those colors, or are those colors an important part of a consistent message?
Absolutely a consistency issue and very important. I think, and I was taking some notes while you were talking, I think where a lot of people run into problems with the inconsistency is that a lot of the colors that we use, and I'm not singling out weather, this is a pretty universal problem, are habitual versus instinctive. And the closest thing that I can liken this to, and if Irene can hear me, maybe she'll agree, is a sort of visual non-regional diction. And that's sort of tapping into this color palette, this color system that we sort of instinctively have versus what we're used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where people run into problems where color consistency doesn't match up with the message is they're using colors that fight against the message. And the closest example I can think to that is whenever we would use pink to represent heavy snowfall. Not only is that in the cool palette, so if it's used for intensity and aggressive weather, it's not an intensive color. And it has no color association with the visuals of the weather. So I think color is important, but I think if it's going to be used, it needs to appeal to people's instinctive nature.
Okay, let's try Miss Irene again.
I hope that wasn't just all.
No, Kent, that was fabulous.
Okay.
Oh wait, can we hear her now?
Nope, not yet.
No. All right.
Go ahead.
Irene, we'll get you back on, I promise. Okay, well, we're gonna wait for that really important broadcast perspective, but wow, Kent, you mentioned a word that I think is really interesting, and it's the habitual versus instinctive.
Mm-hmm.
And so I work a lot with the National Weather Service, and whenever I ask about historically why is it done this way, I get a lot of, well, it was always done this way. I don't know. It was passed on to me. My boss taught it to me. They taught it to them. It's just the way it was, or the way it is. And
I actually know why.
Kent, go for it.
Well, the reason they use green for rain and red for severe weather is the old cathode ray tubes on old color TVs were red, green, and blue. So those colors came through very bright and very easily. But now we have cell phones, monitors, and the likes that can project 24 million colors. Yeah. So right there, we're clinging to a habitual color palette.
And the Weather Service is using most of those colors, by the way.
Again, I'm not picking on anybody.
Well, and I'm not either, because I think that the thing is, and it really comes down to, and I don't know that we have good data on this. Rick, I think you mentioned that in some respects we need better social science research, better data on this. And the question becomes, is it a problem? Is inconsistency a problem? When is it a problem? And again, can we define what inconsistency looks like versus consistency? I saw a push when the Twitter graphics came out to sort of simplify. All warnings were red, all watches, I think, were yellow. I saw even people that weren't weather colleagues of mine tweeted me and said, "What's up with this?" They said a severe thunderstorm watch should be that, what is it? Some kind of pink. There's a special, a dusty rose or something, right? And they were missing it. And one of the reasons I got a lot of feedback, and I thought one of the reasons why this isn't working is because on Twitter, you're looking at it really quickly. You don't want to just know that it's a warning. You want to know what type of warning it is. And so I admit that when I go to weather.gov, I actually don't kill me out there in the Twitter world. I kind of like the 124 colors because I really like to see the distribution of hazards And so to me, the colors have to associate with attribute. So if you want to look at individual hazard type, then the 124 colors perhaps works really well. But if you're looking at perhaps urgency, you could condense down those colors quite a bit. And I don't want to get too much into sort of hazard simplification, but it does relate to sort of color and consistency and what attributes we're using. And in the case, Rick, that you talked about outlooks, we are communicating the same thing. But I think sometimes inconsistency comes into play because we're actually communicating different attributes of the hazard, and therefore we're comparing sort of apples and oranges. And so I think those color legends, Kent, I think are really important to differentiate what they are. I see. Oh, go ahead, Kent.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with you.
Oh,
And Gene, I was just going to mention too, I think we're talking a lot about colors. Obviously, consistency has lots of other aspects. Just in outlooks alone, we can have differences in colors. We can have differences in words, and differences in numbers.
absolutely.
And differences in how the categories are stacked. Do you go, the worst is on the top and the least bad is on the bottom, or
Right.
vice versa? Some outlooks are based on different timing, and we're talking a lot about outlooks here. That's just what I have in my head today in the mode I'm in for severe weather season, but this could apply to anything. So there's, again, it's complicated.
Absolutely. And I'd love to see if Irene is on, because I know she probably has lots of great things. Irene, are you back?
Yes, can you hear me?
Your
All right, good.
laughter
I'm
is
sorry.
music to my ears.
I think they were trying to test out the internet at work today. Bad day.
Oh, gosh.
Anyway.
Well, Irene, you probably have lots to say about all this. So I'm gonna pass the baton to you.
I mean, colors, especially in the crucial, in the warnings, in the tornado warnings, in the flash flood, in the severe thunderstorms. I think those three are the top colors that we, as broadcast meteorologists, should keep consistent. Because
Consistent or the same? They're different.
the same,
Okay.
or at least within the same. I mean, I understand there's different computer systems. Right now, I would maybe 99% of the stations have the same computer system, but there's some smaller stations that maybe have not acquired the new computer systems. So I understand that then maybe the shading might be a little bit different. I mean, it might be a red, or it can be a slight less red, but it's still a red. So it keeps the consistency there. As long as it's not a green, as long as it's not a purple, as long as it's not a yellow. The graphics colors are important, especially when we're talking about that crucial tornado warning, or that severe thunderstorm, or that flash flood. But also we have to consider blind people. I mean, or colorblind people.
Colorblind.
I mean,
yeah.
I think our speech as broadcast meteorologists is very important. We're talking about the tone also that comes to play too. I would say at times more than the colors.
I think that's a great point here. You know, I think we often, when we think about consistency, when I look at conversations about it on Twitter, it often is focused on graphics. But again, just as there are many attributes to weather and forecasting, there are a lot of attributes to communication. And so when we think about graphics, color is definitely part of it, but so are map projections, for example. You can use a different map projection and it changes sort of the whole scale of the risk and how people are looking at it, whether it's closer to you, further away from you. The words, tone can be drastically different. Again, sometimes it's easier to define what's different and we know is not consistent versus what is. But I think these attributes are really important. And Irene, I know we've had a lot of discussions about this, and I'd like to bring up just a little bit of discussion about words. I know that you've done a lot of English to Spanish translation of weather words and the lack of consistency there. Could you sort of elaborate on some of your thoughts on that issue?
Well, in the Spanish TV world, it's very difficult, and it's harder, I think, because it's from whatever the English world is now. I mean, Spanish is still about 10 years behind as far as weather goes, as a weather enterprise. We're still dealing with maybe a lack of Spanish-speaking meteorologists. So if we're starting out there, I mean, it's very difficult because now we're dealing with a whole different ball game.
Mhm.
The lack of information, maybe if somebody, it's you know, and it's not their fault. They're given weather because they're put in that position, and they don't understand the discussions from the National Weather Service, or everything is an alert. Everything is an alert, and there's not really a distinguish between a warning and a watch. Now, this is not happening in all markets right now. Great, good, great, thankfully, but it is important because when we look at the Spanish population, it's a lot of Spanish work outside. They greatly depend on weather.
Right.
So, and data shows that Spanish people turn to English TV whenever there's severe weather. So, I mean, keeping that consistency, it's really, really important in Spanish. So, luckily, I've worked with a friend in the National Weather Service to try to keep the wording the same with the watches and the warnings. And
Right.
that's where we're starting out. We haven't gotten in the colors yet, but at least we're getting the wording, you know. And
Yeah.
and in English, I mean, colors are important. I think that, like I said, that the top 3 warnings should be kept the same throughout all the TV stations. Now afterwards, I mean, you can switch your maps. You can, like you said, you know, you can zoom it out, you can zoom it in, you can tilt it, you can flatten it out. There's a way to be different, but to have the same consistency with the crucial information, with the most important warnings out there.
So let's go back to Kent for a second. What do you think about what Irene just said? Maybe keep some of the colors the same. I'm going to use the same because I don't think the same and consistent, I don't think they're the same definition. So if we truly want people to do the same thing, so like all tornadoes should wear a uniform, you know, they're all going to be red on every map, then let's admit that. Let's admit where we think they should be the same. But Kent, what do you think about changing other graphical dimensions? Do you think that creates a level of consistency, or do you think that could change the message dramatically as well?
Wow. Well, as Richard said, that's complicated. I would agree that if you're designing for a specific purpose, in this case saving lives, then absolutely pick the big nasties, the big tornadoes, the floods, and be consistent across cultures, across boundaries, across languages. I think intensity is definitely something you can look at. And again, I'll kind of go back into the emotional intensity of color for that. So the big bads, as I'm just going to call them, should probably exist in like the reds and the intense color palettes. I think that where the problem is with consistency now is that's not agreed on. That's not like the same across the board. So where the challenge that I would perceive is creating a cultural acceptance and a cultural shift to one color, to one style, and saying, this is the way it is, get used to it. And I know that's a big lift.
I don't know who's going to do that.
Well, that was exactly my question. I wanted to follow up on that, Dr. Gina. It's who decides what the standard is going to be, and can we all agree to that? Using the example of SPC, who I love and respect and have worked with a lot of those people or gone to school with them. So I don't want to pick on them or anything like that, but they have to choose those 5 colors or however many colors they're going to use. And it has to work in Nome, Alaska, Key West, Dallas, Fort Worth, Oklahoma City, and Orlando. And one size does not always fit all. And I've had a
Cheers.
more
I'll
than
drink my coffee to that.
Yeah, I've had more than a few conversations with my colleagues like Rick or Bill at SPC, and you know, I would never want to put SPC or any other national center into the frame of having to mediate the differences between what we may be doing or what Caribou, Maine, or wherever comes up.
Right.
But everything we say here resonates. But how do we make this across 50 states and millions of jurisdictions.
I know for me, we've had the same discussions that you have, Mark, in our office. Yeah. We're blessed with this office to have several very talented graphic designers, and they're always coming up with these ideas, and they're working with other meteorologists around the National Weather Service. And the challenge of just even like a snowfall color graph, you know, 2 inches of snow here in El Paso is a big deal, and it's going to cause a lot of problems. But you can't color that the same on the map for 2 inches of snow in Buffalo, because it just won't mean the same. So there's, like Mark said, there's challenges just like that. I know that you know, moving on to a different subject, kind of, that when we first started in social media for the Weather Service, we spent some time training all the weather offices in, hey, red is a bad color. If you have a nice sunny weather day, don't necessarily use red, because that's what catches people's attention. So, you know, like Mark said, I look to the social scientists to kind of tell us what are the, for lack of a better word, red flag words, or red flag colors.
Well, that's a red flag warning too. So now we've just confused everyone.
Yeah, now we've got another number out there.
We got all these colors. But
in this topic, oh, I'm sorry, Tim.
No, well, what I was going to finish with real quick is that how we get these colors across, how we try to project a message needs to be consistent with the colors that we're using. You know, I think we can, once we understand which colors catches people's attention, then we throw those at the big, I guess for less of a better word, the big three that we're talking about. And then we can kind of use some other colors to kind of maybe augment and differentiate ourselves. But I think I kind of agree that I think the big ones, we should use the bright big colors to catch people's attentions. So
here's the thing. So I want to go back to a phrase that Kent has used now 2 or 3 times. You have, and it's fantastic. And I think it's worth really emphasizing. And you use the word cultures, or culture. And I think that there are different cultures here in a variety of ways. There's organizational culture. So from what Mark and Rick have sort of said, and Tim, you know, there's the National Weather Service as an organizational culture. And I don't know that you're looking for consistency. I think you're looking for uniformity within your agency. That when you issue a tornado warning in Massachusetts versus DC versus Oklahoma versus Texas, it's going to be the same. The issue is when we level up and look at media or weather industry, that culture is different. That's where marketing and PR comes in. And you do need to look a little different. So maybe it opens it up to more discussion of consistency. And then something that hasn't come up, but I think, Kent, you're referring to it, but I'd like to elaborate a little bit and then pass it on, is sort of levels of analysis or levels of community in how that changes the message. So bear with me for a second. If you're in a WFO like Dallas or the Norman area, Oklahoma City area, you have a specific audience that you're working with. Irene, the same within your media market. You can use the same type of communication. You can be consistent or the same with your partners because you're working with them. That's one culture. Your media market, although it's probably many cultures, let's be more realistic. But for the sake of conversation, let's consider that a community culture. Rick, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that although you are neighboring WFOs, you're probably not identical, right? I mean, am I seeing nodding there in the bottom of my screen a little bit? You're not. You might have some similarities, but you're not identical. Okay. And again, to me, identical and uniform go together. So consistency is something different. When I think about National Weather Service headquarters and some of the challenges that they are posed with, I think, wow, this is hard. Because when you're working with partners like FEMA or DHS, they're looking across WFOs, they're looking across different regions, they're looking across different media markets, Irene. They're looking for uniformity. So what have we done? We've looked at impact statements, for example, and we've made them the same. Well, then I go out and I do focus groups for my work on the ground, and I speak to emergency managers. And the emergency managers, they tell me, and Rick, you saw some of this in focus groups, I don't want the same message. I don't want a uniform message for every tornado or every snowstorm or every hurricane, because then it's not unique. If you make the message uniform, you're basically telling me that the hazard is uniform too, and it's not. Each hazard is unique. So how do we factor in then? And it kind of goes back to, Rick, what you said in the beginning. This is complicated. This is not simple. Perhaps we could achieve a level of consistency within an integrated warning team, within a WFO, within the media markets within there. But how do we achieve a level of consistency? Again, I still don't know what the metrics are for that. How do you do it across boundaries? Because at some point when you focus on all the boundaries, you become a uniform, and you've made weather wear a uniform. And frankly, it's a fingerprint, man. We're all different, and so is weather. So I don't think we're going for uniformity. Then gosh, how do we work across these different cultures in these different organizational and community boundaries? And Kent, to go back to your really great word, how do we incorporate different cultures? I'll pass that back to all of you.
Ken, she used your name. So.
I have stumped the panel.
It's a good question, Gina.
Yeah.
I surely don't know the answer. If we're talking uniformity or at least consistency, if you go back to the Sandy assessment where there were some references to differing opinions that were just barely slightly different, but the general gist of it was coming back out to say, hey, this is not your normal everyday storm. This is big and bad. How do we get to that point where we are changing the culture? Because, Rick, his office, Tim's office may treat each tornado warning differently. And I know our office treats every tornado warning differently. Either it's the wording of the warning itself, or what we put into chat, or what we tweet out, or whatever the case may be. But when it comes to social media, especially, I kind of go back to something that Irene said a while ago. If you've got a meteorologist on screen, you have that tone of voice. You have that extra level of interpretation, so to speak. But when it comes to a static social media message, the tone is up to the reader. And how do we make that? And, going back to what Kent said earlier, the big and bad, do we make those XYZ colors as far as the palette goes? And is everybody going to be happy with that? And is that something we can all live with, even if we are not always happy with that?
Right.
I'm not sure that it really answers the question you posed, but hopefully that gave a few other people some time to think.
I don't think we're going to have perfect answers, but I see lots of thoughts. Kent?
I just want to ask, for my purposes for consistency, how is it agreed upon for the severe thunderstorm and tornado watch versus warning? Like that vocabulary, how is that agreed upon?
In terms of, Rick, do you want to take that one?
I was going to say I don't really know. And this is where we get into, there's layers of inconsistency, and even within the National Weather Service, we're not totally consistent. Historically and culturally, back into the early days of the Severe Storms Forecast Center and what's currently the Storm Prediction Center, tornado watches, for example, were always thought of to be red. And we still call them a red box or a blue box. A blue is severe thunderstorm watch, red is a tornado watch typically. Then we introduce warnings into that, and then we have different colors. I honestly don't know. I don't know where the colors come from. I can tell you that the colors that appear on our national website, if you just go to weather.gov, that is established at the national headquarters level. But as far as anything below that, I think most offices would stick to that color convention. But then we get introduced into Twitter, the different color convention where now all watches are yellow and all warnings are red, and we've already talked about that. But.
Right, and it comes down to the attribute for that, for sure. Yeah. Other thoughts on that? I can keep asking more questions because I've got more follow-ups, but Irene or...
Yeah, I
Marketing.
mean, with the whole social media, it just takes up in a whole different webinar. It's a whole different Wednesday. And it's true. I mean, how often, think about it, how often do you receive an email and you feel in a certain way that day and you're like, wow, this person's mad at me, or this person's really, cool today or anything. And it's just really on how you feel that day, not the person that sent it.
Yeah, and you can misinterpret it, or you can read the first part of the message but not the rest of it, or you can skim and you see one word and it throws you off. Gosh, I was home in Boston recently with my parents, and we listened to the same station. My father has his favorite broadcast meteorologist. I won't say who it is, but those of you who know me probably know who it is. And it's on. We all heard the same forecast. And at the end, my mother goes, "Oh my God, we can't go tomorrow. It's going to be tight. It's going to start at 7 a.m. And I'm like, I looked at her and I go, "What broadcast did you listen to?" She goes, "Well, all I heard was snow in the morning." And I was like, "And that equated to 7 a.m.? I'm like, well, thank goodness your daughter is home, because I listened to the whole thing. And there are going to be some early flurries at 7 a.m., but this thing isn't going to start till 1 or 2 in the afternoon. Relax." And she actually made me check another forecast to check for consistency. So in this particular example, it actually took 2 messages to create a consistent one, which brings me to sort of this point of, where I'm looking at the time. We have about 15 minutes left, and I don't think we're going to come up with any easy answers here in the next 15 minutes, but I'd like to struggle a little bit with maybe some agreed upon parameters, or maybe not agreed upon, but ideas for how to achieve consistency, if we can even try it. Do you need more than one message to have a consistent message? So in other words, can one message create consistency? If I look at that Merriam-Webster dictionary, archaic, to me, I don't know that one message can be archaic necessarily, unless it's an archaic graphic, which we've probably seen some of those in our community. I won't, maybe, because there's definitely a lot of visual features. When I think about the word harmony, I'm a musician. I can't, unless I'm a violinist and I can play 2 strings, but I need 2. I need 2 strings for that. As a flutist, I need 2 flutists for that. So I think one parameter we might be able to agree upon for consistency is you actually need 2 or more of a thing. Yeah. Can we agree upon that? Is that something we can at least think about?
For my purposes, yeah.
From the broadcasting world where I've been, I'm speaking just solely for myself. All the stations that I've been to, I've tried to keep the consistency with the National Weather Service or the SBC. I don't try to keep the consistency with other stations. I mean, at the end of the day, the official source is the official source. Yes, I have my interpretation as a meteorologist, and I can put my intake, but then that all depends on me. And again, on the tone, on how I want to do it, how I want to relay the message. But color-wise, I think I always get it from the National Weather Service, and I think that's something that should be respected.
I'm drawing. Don't.
Well, while she's drawing, I'll mention a couple of questions have come in on Twitter, and they basically kind of similar, and Irene kind of touched on it, and the question is who should determine what the colors are? Should it be the National Weather Service? Should it be the National Weather Association, the AMS? Should it be a national organization like that? Should it be a national media weather organization like the Weather Channel? Who sits here and decides that tornado watches should be red, severe thunderstorm warning should be yellow, snowfall of this amount is orange versus pink? Is this something that we should maybe have an open discussion with at a conference, or do we just do like Irene says, default to the Weather Service?
Well, and I think too, though, I think the question is, again, in order to have an entity that can make decisions, we need to know what we're making decisions on. Mm-hmm. And just as an observer, as the moderator of this really fantastic group, I still don't think we have a definition of what consistency is versus uniformity. If we're saying weather needs to wear a uniform, then, you know, if what Irene is saying is true, okay, so here's sort of my trusty graphic, right? It's pretty terrible, but what's up here, you can't really see it. NWS is up here, and then there's these arrows that go down to sort of media and weather industry. And if each station is saying they're trying to be true to the Weather Service, then we have 10 different versions of true versions of Weather Service messages, right? I mean, they're trying to be consistent with the Weather Service, but yet by doing that, because each of us are going to have different perceptions, right? It's going to look different. And again, I want to go back to the mall analogy, kind of the way we began. I don't go to a mall to find the same shirt or dress in 50 different stores, right? So in order to think about consistent messaging, we have to think about why would we go to different sources? Because if we want all of you to look the same, why do we need 15 different sources of weather information? So I think we're almost making a value judgment that being consistent or maybe even uniform is good. Is there any space for looking at slight differences or consistency as gist, so there will be some inconsistencies, if you will? Is there any space for thinking about the benefits of that?
Gina, I can speak to that really briefly. I see it both with our decision maker partners that we work with on a day-to-day basis, emergency management, public safety, schools, hospitals, people like that. Most of them that I know look at every available source of information, whether it's a Facebook forecaster who has a lot of followers, or our forecast, or the TV stations. Some of that's for situational awareness, but there is this form of almost consensus forecasting, and it seems like the public does some of that too. We get lots of negative comments that why is everything so different, but I think there's people out there that kind of look at it all. They're not watching one station, and Irene can speak to this much more, but I don't think people are faithful to just one station. They're only going to watch that guy or that lady doing the weather.
Yeah.
And I think they're scanning around and skimming around and what their friends are telling them, what's on Twitter, what's on Facebook, what's on TV, what we're saying, and then I don't know what they do with the information, but I think there's a lot of skimming, a lot of informal consensus forecasting going on out there. We don't understand it, but that speaks to maybe there's some utility to being a little different, but again, I don't know.
So maybe what we need to do is continue this conversation at the National Weather Association annual meeting, or perhaps have a webinar part 2, where we sort of focus on where we think inconsistency, so not consistency, but inconsistency, identify where they are the most problematic as a community, and then science those. I like using science as a verb. Science them. Look at those distinct events where we believe inconsistency has created a problem. We need to know what that problem is a little bit. And if it is indeed color, for example, have a dialogue for what we can do about it. I think we need to recognize, though, there are different cultures here. There's, you can be uniform perhaps within the Weather Service because an emergency manager, especially someone from FEMA at a higher level, needs to be able to go from office to office and frankly find some of the same packaged information, right? But when you get to decision support at a local scale, you need to sort of adapt to your culture. And I think the same for media markets. Not only do you have to consider your public's culture, right, your community culture, but you also have the culture of you are a company, and you're going to have other sort of business cultures, organization cultures that influence that. So I think we need to be cognitive of those and frankly sensitive to those, that achieving whatever this thing is called consistency, perhaps we'll call it harmony, archaic harmony at that. Achieving this archaic harmony, I think, is going to be challenging, but perhaps if we identify where inconsistency is a problem, talk about those, science it, and find what is that attribute that we really need to focus on. And if it is indeed color, well, let's push up our sleeves and get to work and see what we can do about it, and bring in folks like Kent, who are a bit more expert in color. And I know there are some other really great social scientists in the field who've done some studies on color in different hazards, and talk about it and see if we can come. Maybe we need a national integrated warning team meeting. it's not good enough to do it at just a local scale. We have to think about that national culture as well. What do you think about that as a next step?
I think that would be great. I mean, I think that this is a topic that we need to touch more on the conferences. Also, when we go to schools and we visit them, it needs to start now in the ground, in the beginning steps, in the baby steps, because it's just gotten so much out of control now. And now, like Rick was saying, people are not only watching TV, people are watching TV, and I'm on my phone, and then I might have on my iPad too, and then I have my laptop. So now I have this whole influx of information coming at me, and it could be all different, especially now if we get into like the different social media profiles and people. So I think that starting at conferences and maybe coming to an agreement, and also, like you said, considering management consultants, at least on my part, just it's hard, but also meteorologists have a responsibility to inform the consultants too, and even to inform management too, that hey, there are deaf people out there that rely on this color. There are colorblind people out there. So, and not necessarily to like be confrontational, but it needs to be explained to them too.
No, absolutely. I mean, I've seen my father is colorblind, and a tornado warning over a radar that has any kind of green on it, green on red, he can't see it. A flash flood warning over a tornado warning. The TORFs, I think Dr. Jen Henderson calls them. If the radar is really red because of where the tornado is, if there's a flash flood warning on top of it, my father can't see it. So that's a huge challenge, another area of research and another area of sort of follow-up. And I noticed quickly on Twitter, there was a lot of conversation about that. So I want to make sure that there are many different cultures here that we need to factor in, and colorblindness is definitely one of them, for sure.
And I think, and again, we're not given a specific entity or an organization the duty to do this, but if the AMS has a mission statement, and we go with like, hey, a meteorologist, this. So maybe if the National Weather Service or NOAA or SBC, somebody that's official, could put out a statement, so that maybe when we run into the problem in quotations, but into the situation where we need to explain to management or to a consultant or anything, it's more official. If we're like, well, here, just read this,
Yeah.
I mean, this is why we do this.
We are reaching the end of our hour. And so what I'd love to do is give you all an opportunity to sort of give your last thoughts about what you want people in the field who are watching this, what you want them to take away about consistency today. We'll start with Rick.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to say the word complicated or complex again, I promise. But it is not as easy as people seem to think it is sometimes on social media, who are very critical of one part of the weather enterprise or the other who is doing something different. We don't even know for sure if it's bad or not. And Gina, I like your idea of digging into picking a more focused area to look at, maybe at the annual meeting coming up or in future webinars, or certainly in future sciencing that goes on. We need to focus in. And I still think the key to a lot of this is we just don't know. We don't know if any of this matters, if it makes a difference. So we need to, if anybody ever wants to do a study, I volunteer our area here. I think this is a good test bed for testing things like that, because there is such a diverse message. But it's an important topic, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here, but we just need a lot more discussion.
Yeah, that's great. And it sounds like if there are any graduate students that are listening to the webinar who are looking for a master's thesis project or PhD, this could be a great opportunity, and they've got a lot of people who would be willing to work with them. Yeah, call Rick. Mark.
I think this is definitely something we've got to continue the conversation, because I think we all knew going into this hour, we're not going to solve a lot or anything in that 1 hour. But to use a couple of really corny analogies, but we all have to be playing the same chord. If a band member is playing an F on guitar and the bass player is playing G minor, it doesn't sound good. And there's some subtleties throughout the message there, but we've all got to be playing that same chord, or at least very, very close to it. because one thing that did not come up in this conversation was hurricanes and tropical storms, because in that case, actually, the message does have some consistency, some order, some different variations of the theme, but it's relatively well understood. What can we learn from them? And then how do we play the same chord with the colors that we're playing with the words, with the messages coming out from not only the Weather Service, but the media and everybody else? But we definitely have got to be playing the same chord.
Thank you. Kent.
I could not agree more. What I tend to tell my students is create a system, design a system, and then design within that system. So I think the point of consistency and then leading up to uniformity is absolutely on point there. But on the point of sort of picking a chord and sticking with it, everybody has to agree on that system or chord and work within those boundaries. I love the fact that you brought up color blindness. I noticed on Twitter somebody followed that up with people who are deaf. So as a graphic designer, you have to excuse me, I feel like I'm playing devil's advocate with everybody. But for me, it would just be a matter of breaking the system down into a form follows function and just get to the basic, most versatile, wide-reaching function and design for that. And obviously try to get the subcultures, try to get the colorblinds, try to get the because somebody did mention colorblindness, red and green, like you said, Gina, the first things to go. So and the reality of the situation, you're probably not going to get it all, but you can certainly, I think, get close.
And maybe we could define parameters for the most important days or types of events to achieve that consistency. There are lots of different attributes to this situation to consider. Irene, last, and then we'll go back to Tim.
The big three. I mean, if we can keep consistency in those, I don't care about, if you're painting the other ones, whatever color patterns, whatever you want. But I mean, the big three is the most dangerous ones. And if we can focus on the impact, because we know that each storm is different, like Mark just said with the National Hurricane Center. But at the end, a warning is a warning, and it tells you that, hey, it's imminent, with the tornado warning too. So maybe we should be focusing more on the actions that people need to take. That the warning is action, take action now. The watch, just be vigilant,
Right.
And I think if we can focus on that, and in the broadcasting enterprise, if we can keep at least a consistency, and I'm talking about the colors, the same colors with the big three, I think that'll help out a large percentage of the people.
Awesome. Well, it has been a privilege to be your moderator today, and I think the NWA abstract deadline is tomorrow. I hope it's not today, because I could surely use another day. It looks like we need to submit something. So I'll put it on my homework today to maybe work with some of you to submit a panel discussion. I think it would be really great to continue this dialogue at the National Weather Association annual meeting in September. And should weather wear a uniform, Tim? I think the jury's still out.
I agree, but I also agree that the discussion today was fantastic. A lot of ideas were thrown out. Like I said, I don't know if we came right to a consensus, but I do like the fact that we had a good discussion. And I think moving forward, we have an idea that we, like you said, Dr. Gina, is that maybe we need to focus down on a few areas to kind of build ourselves up from there. And I think the AMS and National Weather Association, those organizations can kind of help lead the way and bring in their partners from whether it's in private broadcast or government meteorology to help us all have a good discussion. And maybe we focus on, like Irene said, focus on a few areas and try to be consistent in those areas and let others kind of vary a little from that point. But I think we had just a great discussion today.
Completely agreed. It's wonderful to know that the mission is uniform. How it's implemented may be a little different at times, but the mission is uniform, and that's what's keeping us all together, and that's what's keeping the dialogue going. And one day, perhaps in the future we'll know what consistency is and how to achieve it.
Very good. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. Had a lot of help behind the scenes with monitoring Twitter, Castle Williams, Min Fan, Jonathan Bales. They all helped behind the scenes. Trevor Boucher was there as well. So I thanked everyone on the social media team of the National Weather Association and the other committee members that helped out today. Remember to join us next month for another National Weather Association webinar Wednesday. And in the meantime, keep an eye on the weather, and we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.